Welcome to My Life Chassidishe Applied, episode 582. This program is in loving memory of Miriam Bas Eliyahu Altes, Aleh HaShalom, and in merit of Baruch ben Yomen ben Menucha Lana Altes, Yukosil ben Leah Rochel and Rochel Bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Tadris ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rochel Altes. We are now in the first week of the month of Adar, Mishanichnas, Adar Marben Besimcha. When we enter the month of Adar, we increase in joy as a result of Purim. So Purim's effect, interestingly, is not just going forward, it's also the Mafreya. It transforms the entire month. Chedesh HaShanepach Lehem, as the Megillah says. The entire month was transformed from the beginning of the month, because the beginning of the month, tragically, everybody thought this was it, a genocide. Haman had succeeded in convincing the king, Achashverosh, to destroy Anoshim, Noshim, V'taf, all the men, women, and children, from the empire of Persia, which was then the empire that controlled the entire world, that controlled the entire Jewish nation. So now that Purim came about, it didn't just affect things going forward, it transformed that very decree was transformed and the enemies were destroyed instead. So what are we left with? That not only do we have what we saved, but it also transformed the past, even the negative, which itself is already a tremendous lesson in life, that when we're faced with different challenges and setbacks and difficulties, at the moment can appear a situation that some would feel we don't have hope, that not only do you get redeemed and everything clears up, but it actually transforms that even those moments of terror and fear and concern actually turn out to become part of the celebration itself. That's the obvious lesson from the month of Adar. That's why Mishanichnas Adar Marben Besimcha from the beginning of the month. So, as our custom is, this program is to apply Torah, Melashon Hera, and Chassidus particularly, to our personal lives. So there you have. So it's not just that we enter the month and we know there's Simcha, Purim is coming, we prepare for it, but it actually affects us personally because it's the story of our lives. Whatever challenges you have, even the harshest decrees, can and will be transformed. So that's a good way to open up this program. As I said, the first week of the month of Adar. Since it is the month of Adar, we'll talk about a few questions that came in regarding the month, in addition to what we already discussed last week, which was the week of the Shabbos Mevarchim, the Shabbos that blesses the month of Adar. And being that it's also this week is also Zayin Adar, the 7th of Adar, which is both the birthday and the Istalkus, the yahrzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu, as well as coming Shabbos is Yud Alef Adar, which is the yahrzeit of the Rogatchover Gaon, as well as Parsha Tetzaveh. So, as we have been doing over the last good while, been applying all these special dates and Parsha to our personal lives, because that's the key. Applying it to our lives, our personal, emotional, psychological, spiritual lives. That is the mission and the goal of Chassidishe Applied. We have a website, chassidisheapplied.com, where you can submit any question anonymously, totally anonymously, completely. Every question is acceptable. Nothing's taboo, nothing's off limits. And hopefully I'll be able to get to them. There are more questions coming in than answers, to be very honest. But thank God, the program continues to thrive because it's fed by the fuel of your questions. You also have many other resources there. Please take advantage of that. I should also mention that I give a daily Chassidus class in Samach Vav now, the Hemshech Samach Vav, the Rebbe Rashab. We had finished after many years of study Hemshech Ayin Beis. So you can join the class. It's a live class, 9:30 every weekday morning. 9:30 New York time, from 9:30 to 10:30. On Sundays, it's from 10 till around 11:30. You go to samachvav.com and you can get more details. It's all part of chassidisapplied.com. I also do a weekly Tanya share. People have been asking me every Motzei Shabbos, every Saturday night, 10 p.m. That was the time when Rabbi Weinberg and Rabbi Katz, all of Shalom, used to teach Tanya in Yiddish on the radio. So I do that on radio. It's also online as well at tanyaapplied.com for more details. Every Motzei Shabbos, a half hour from 10 to 10:30 New York p.m., New York time. We're up to the middle of chapter 31. So with all those announcements, all part of Chassidus Applied, let us go straight into, after our initial lesson from the month of Adar, is there a connection between joy and Pisces, the sign of Adar? So the answer is absolutely. Pisces is, in simple English, fish. So it's mazel dogim. And the fish, always in Judaism, is a blessing, is a sign of blessing. The question is why. So let's start with a blessing. And blessings and joy go hand in hand, as we shall see. So one of the reasons fish are compared to a blessing is because they're always covered. Samim mina dovra, samim mina ayin, the Gemara says. Something that's covered from the eye is more prone to blessing, because it doesn't have probing and negative energy being applied to it. When something is very obvious, people see it. The concept of an ayin hara, we know, the evil eye, even though we say that evil eye only affects ayin hara, those that believe in it, but still we don't need to especially get special attention. And that's why when the person does something beautiful, sometimes it should be done quietly, humbly. Doesn't necessarily, you don't need to have extra attention. Fish are always underwater, and that's why they multiply in such numbers, as according to the Gemara. Because a bracha, blessings come when it's under the radar, you can call it. Fish also, we know, unlike meat, does not need shchita, does not need to be slaughtered. Why is that? They're live. They're not like vegetation. The answer is because they're constantly submerged in water. They're always submerged in the mikveh. In spiritual terms, Chassidus explains, water is compared to Alma Dischasya, the hidden worlds, like the world of thought. Everything is concealed under the water. The mammals, the creatures on the land, Yabasha, they are called the creatures from Alma Dischasya, the revealed world, like speech. Speech, the letters and the words are pronounced, and we hear, and they're very tangible. So it doesn't mean there are no creatures in the sea. There are actually more than in the land, as the Gemara says. Kol ma sheyesh biyabosh yesh biyam. All the creatures that exist on land exist in the sea. That means the sea has even more than the land. And yet they're all undercover, so to speak. So what does it mean, Beruchni, is that they are submerged in their source. So there's a direct connection. There isn't that split, the dichotomy between the entity and its source. So fish represent being connected to their source. That's why in the Zohar, it calls Sadikim Nunayama. They're called the fish of the sea. So this month of Adar is a month of mazel body, as the Gemara says. It's a healthy mazel for Yidden. This is a time when people have challenges, whether it's in court and so on. This is the right time because it's auspicious time for celebrations. So it's directly connected to the mazel. The mazel of Pisces, fish, represents this idea of blessing that comes especially when things are concealed. Now, what is that connected to joy? So first of all, joy is in general connected to blessing. Anything with blessing is always going to bring joy. But joy too has an element of revealing the concealed. Chassidus explains that it says, Nichnis yayin yotze seid. When a person drinks wine, it brings out the secrets. So a technical reason, it means a person who's drink, because they're looser, their tongue is looser, and secrets that are usually in their heart, that they usually don't reveal, come out. But it's deeper than that. Yayin and soda, the same gematria, 70. Yayin is Yud, Yud, Nun, 50, 60, 70, and same thing, Sod. So Kabbalah, Chassidishe explained that it reveals the inner dimension, like you see a grape. What is a grape? The wine has to be squeezed from the grape. On the grape, you don't see it openly. Literally like fish in the sea. It's hidden. Alma Diskasya. So the deepest joy is the one that remains concealed. And when it breaks out, it's Simcha Peres Geder, it breaks through all boundaries. That's what joy is about. And that's why indeed, by Purim, you say, Yehudim Simcha v'Sasim Yikar, Simcha and Sasim. All four languages connected to joy. And it was a joy that came from the darkness. Like we said, Chedesh Hashanepach. And that's the greatest joy of all. In Simcha ketoros asveikas. There's no Simcha like the one that resolves doubts. Here, suffix is also Gematria Amalek, Haman is connected to Amalek's doubts. So Simcha is the breakout, especially when something comes from a concealed state. When you reveal it, it's much more intense than when it's just a revealed state. So all of it connects together with the idea of revealing deeper secrets, deeper powers. The month of Adar, the month of joy, the month of Pisces and fish. So we all have that fish element within us. So when we learn Torah, which is compared to water, compared to wine, especially primis Torah, Rozeh deraisa, Rozeh derozin, there's wine, there's oil, similar idea, even deeper. All that helps us reveal the deepest, more, we'll call the more mysterious, the more secretive, the more hidden layers within the recesses of our soul. Why is the Adar made up of two words, alef, dar? So indeed, as someone writes, is there a teaching that says Adar can stand for alef, dar, which means Hashem dwells. Dar from the word dira, alef, Hashem, dar. And if so, how do we reconcile it with the Megillah suggesting Hashem was in a state of slumber? Slumber seems like it's a concealed state, whereas dar means dwell, he's in a revealed state. So the place, actually, the source of this is from the Eira Teira, from the Tzemach Tzedek. I believe it's in Parsha Truma. I have to look up the page, but he says there on the bottom of the page, he says alef dar, and he talks about the concept of dar, of dira, of manifesting godliness. Like we learn in Parsha Truma, the Parsha we're just coming from, the general of the Parshas that we're reading now, that v'shachanti b'seicham, also the Migdash v'shachanti b'seicham, that the Mishkan, the sanctuary, became a place where God dwelt. Alef dar. The Eibishter only dwells with his simcha. When people are depressed or despondent, it's not a keli for simcha, for bracha. Bracha is when there's joy, like it says in Zohar. When you smile from below, Hashem smiles back. So it opens up channels, k'mayim aponim laponim, like a face is reflected in water. Again, in water. So Adar, a month of joy, represents this concept of manifesting godliness. The fact that B'leilahu Nazar Shas HaMelech, that actually is before the miracle, that Taki and Golas, the divine is concealed. But then B'leilahu Nazar Shas HaMelech, like the Mariel writes, that's when the Megillah, you start reading it louder because that's the beginning of the Nes. The awakening, not the sleeping part. So the sleeping part represents that, but you want to have the Gili of Adar. And the Gili of Adar is the B'leilahu Nodada Shnas HaMelech, the awakening. Now, even though Ani Yeshena V'li Be'er, even though I am asleep, my heart is awake. And then continues the story. What happens? Achashverosh cannot sleep. It goes on Reishish Achrish Shalei, the Melech Sha'achrish V'Reishish Shalei, meaning reflecting on the divine. And that creates a Gilui that ultimately would bring the Geula of Purim Taka Bislapshus, manifest in the laws of nature, but still. Are there other reasons why we increase in joy during this month? Is it solely because of the miracle of Purim, or are there other reasons? I believe a similar question was asked in last week's program. We know it's from Purim. the Megillah says in Beferish, Achadish Hashanepach V'napachu. That it all happened because of the Gzeda, the decree that Haman, sadly, the terrible decree that he passed, but then it was all transformed, and that's what causes the Simcha of Chodesh Adar. But a follow-up to this question is like this. Does Adar have an association with Adaru, this month in Akkadian and in Babylonian? Those languages from that part of the time in history, Mesopotamia, was Akkadian and Babylonian. So there was a word called Adaru, and some connect Adar to the Shemesh She'olo Imaim Mebavel. It's connected to the Babylonian name, and Adaru actually means darkness and gloom. So this person is writing, perhaps it was named so because it was cloudy and rainy month that transitioned winter into spring. But there, it doesn't appear the ancient Babylonians saw it as a happy and joyous month. So did we inject the happiness into it through the miracles of Purim? You could say exactly that. That from Mitzad Bavel from the word Bavel, confusion, Bola, as the Pasuk says, in a state of darkness and gloom. But remember, it's a Chedesh Hashanapach lehem. That means initially, it could have been, God forbid, a very dark and gloomy month, and end up being transformed into holiness, into oyer and light, and joy and celebration. So that itself indicates on the transformation. Yeah. Here's a question, not really connected directly to Adar, but since the person wrote it, does connect it to Adar, I guess because there's a certain humorous side to it, so it's connected create a little lebedik, abyssal joy. So let me read it. Can animals be trained to do mitzvos, he writes? Or she writes, I'm not sure. I don't know. As I said, it's anonymous. So here's how the person writes the question. With all the serious things going on in the world today, this might seem like a silly question. Can animals do mitzvahs? My husband trained our dog that when he drops $1 on the floor, the dog picks it up with his mouth and drops it in a tzedakah box. Okay? We know the dog doesn't realize what he's doing and only does it because we reward him with a food treat, but he's still doing it. If a person puts on tefillin, even if he doesn't understand the reasons behind it, and only does it because he's promised a reward, he still gets credit for the mitzvah of tefillin. Can we say the same thing for animals? For example, if someone in the old country had a horse and used the horse to pull a wagon that brought people into town to attend shul or yeshiva, would the horse get credit from Hashem for partnering in a mitzvah? In the spirit of increasing joy in Adar, I ask this question because it would bring me joy to hear a philosophical discussion on the topic. Thank you. So in that same spirit, I'm answering this question. So first of all, it's a tongue-in-cheek, a light side to this, a light-hearted side is one thing. Practically speaking, mitzvahs are given only to neshamas begufim, to yidden, mitzvahs. Even malachim are not given mitzvahs. Le b'shamayim, it's not in heaven. So we were given mitzvahs. However, our mitzvahs also include things like b'chol d'rachecha de'yu, in all your ways you should know God, v'chol masecha yiyeh l'shem shamayim, and all your actions should be for the sake of heaven. So that includes also, like we say, not just you and your family, but also b'hamtecha, your animal, and your servant, and so on. So it's true, on Shabbos and the other ways, we also elevate, make sure that everything in our household and everything in our possessions are all l'shem shamayim. But to say an animal does mitzvahs is not technically correct. Well, you could say that we can use animals, like sher le'el. You use an ox, let's say, to the yoke of an ox to plow a field, and then you use the growth from rav tvuz b'keach sher, the produce that comes from that. You use it then for kedusha dika purposes, for holy purposes, and for malacha that is used l'shem shamayim. Then in a sense, yes, you are elevating the animal, just like you elevate demim tzemeach, you also elevate chai. Just like we elevate mineral world and the vegetable world, we can also elevate the animal world. And just like we see the negative, by the Mabul it says, why were the animals killed? Because they were corrupted by the people. So if they can be corrupted, they can also be refined. Animal on its own, as he says in Tanya, lemeshana tafkidam, they never waver from the clockwork and the program God created them. So they don't do avedas, they don't do mitzvos. We don't look at it that way. We don't prosecute an animal for being a predator, if that's its nature. And we don't reward an animal for being kind, if that's its nature. That free will is given to the human being, to the neshama beguf tayyid. But by extension, our behavior, absolutely. I remember, since we're talking on the light side, someone coming to me telling me they had a few dogs as pets, and the dog was exhibiting a lot of neurotic behavior. I went to won't believe this, yes, a dog therapist. There are dog therapists, veterinarians, that are psychologists for animals. And the veterinarian said to them that I feel that the dog is exposed to a lot of tension and arguments on your domestic front between you and your spouse. And the dog is picking up on that, and that's why it's getting all neurotic, all crazy here. So I remember thinking to myself, you see, you can affect even animals. Anyway, getting back to our topic, that is the answer to the question. Everything has to have a lesson in life. Yes, when we say rotz mitzvah, that a person runs the mitzvah, and it says, and we say in the morning, it says you should be gibur kari, and oz kanemar, and rotz katzvi, and what is the fourth one? Is rotz katzvi. You see clearly we're using animals as lessons to teach us our avodah, but in turn, when you do that, you're elevating them and their messages to us. So what you see from that is that not only is that's part of our shlichus in this world, is to elevate every part of the world. Okay. And in that sense, will they get schar? They don't get reward. But as I said, firstly, they fulfill their purpose. And secondly, they help us do our avodah. And in a sense, by extension, that is ultimately the ultimate reward that even animals get. Okay. Kal kanesher, that was the fourth one. Kal kanesher, like an eagle, to be light like an eagle. Okay. We see in the Markova as well, famous sikha that the Rebbe speaks about, keep making sure preventing children from being exposed to animals for no particular reason that are not pure, not impure animals or non-kosher animals. He talks also about that we see in Markova, you do have an ari, and you have a share. An ari is a chayet meya, and nevertheless it's used in the Markova. So Chassidishe already explains that. Not relevant to our particular discussion here. So let's now move to Zayin Adar. Zayin Adar, as we know, famous story connected to Purim. That when Haman threw his lots, his geidel, purhu a geidel, so it fell out in Adar, and he was simcha, because he knew that Adar was the month when Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. And we know that from the Torah itself. Because you see, the Chodesh Shvat, where it says the beginning of Sefer Dvarim, that B'Chodesh HaAchad Asar, the 11th month, which is the month of Shvat, B'Achad L'Chodesh is when Moshe began to speak, and for 37 days until Zayin Adar when he passes away. So Haman was b'simcha, because now it fell on that month when the great Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. He felt it was a good omen for the time to do what he wanted to do to the Yidden. Okay. But the Gemara says, V'hikdimu shkoleim keidim shkolov. The fact of the matter is that Yidden brought shkolim before. They bring shkolim to Chodesh Adar. But the Gemara continues and explains because Haman did not know that Moshe was also born in Zayin Adar. Now that Chazal learn out, because we don't see that from the Psukim. Because in Parsha Shmeish, where it says he was born, doesn't have any indication it's the month of Adar. And Mefarshim used that to explain why Haman didn't know of it. He was a scholar. But bottom line is that Zayin Adar is both. Now we know in Yiddishkeit, both a birthday, and especially a Istalkus, a Elula, are elevated days. At the time, it's a sad day. And yet, when we come to Zayin Adar, like someone asked the question, I'm wondering why, well, the question, let's first put it this way. Why don't we make a bigger deal of this day, the birthday and yahrzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu? I'm wondering why in Chabad we don't make a big deal of Zayin Adar without Moshe Rabbeinu. We wouldn't have without Moshe Rabbeinu, we wouldn't have the Torah, which is very applicable to us. Moshe took us out of Mitzrayim, and we make a huge deal of Yutas Kislev when the Alter Rebbe came out of prison. I'm wondering if you could clarify why Zayin Adar isn't made a big deal of. Another person writes in this one, we have been told the birthday and yahrzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu is the 7th of Adar. Do we know why this day is not considered a holiday, since our greatest prophet and redeemer was born on this day? Just for comparative purposes, look at Lag BaOmer, the yahrzeit and the Hilula of Rashbi, and Rashbi specifically asked a great simcha should be made then. So to say it's only because it was a sad day because we passed away, so firstly, we see that not all Elula over the years becomes a day that you honor. Now there are different customs, brought in Sfarim, of different things that are done on Zayin Adar. By the Rabbeim, Chabad Rabbeim, only the Rabbeim, once they became Rebbe, they didn't say Tachna on Zayin Adar, everyone else did. So this question is actually asked, why is it not honored with a bigger trask by the Rebbe himself? Chelik Tazayin Lekutei Sichos, volume 16, talks about Zayin Adar. And the Nekudah, briefly, is based on the fact that this week's Parsha, actually, it's the only Parsha after Moshe is born that you don't see his name. It says Va'ata Tetzaveh. It doesn't say Moshe's name. So commentaries explain, because in this month, in this Parsha, I should say, Moshe passed away. So it's like a memory to remind us that he was missing. So you don't mention his name. And it reminds us also of Macheni no Mesifrecha. When Moshe was praying for the Yidden for forgiveness for the Chet HaEgel, so one of the things he said to Hashem is, erase my name. It didn't end up happening because Hashem did forgive. But to remember his Mesiras Nefesh, so we have a Parsha that does not have his name. And different commentaries bring this. The Rebbe cites all the different sources. But everything has a positive side. Can't just be to remind us of something that didn't happen anyway at the end. So yes, it reminds us of a Mesiras Nefesh, but what would be the advantage of not mentioning Moshe's name after the fact? So the answer is because a name at the end of the day is a gilui. When you say a name, it's a gilui. Like, for example, by the Eibishter, and Tzadikim Deim Lebedim, you say that Be'emes, Eibishter is Anoichi lo yisram is lo b'shum eiz v'lo b'shum kates. I, the Etzem, Atzmos, is not alluded to, cannot even be described in any way, not just in words, but even in holy names. Not no letter and no even a kates, not even an edge, not even a speck, not even a point of a letter. And that's why when we talk about Atzmus Taka, we say higher than all names. He's beyond all names. Yes, he can manifest and chooses to manifest the names, and Havaya Shema Etzem, but it's still a name at the end of the day. Hayuhu Shmei Belvad. Hu and Shmei are not the same. So the same is when we say at the beginning of Parsha Vayikra, it says Vayikra el Moshe. It doesn't say Havaya. So the Alter Rebbe explains, because you're talking about the Etzem higher than names. So Tzadikim Deim Lebedim, Moshe Rabbeinu also has an Etzem and a Gilui. His Gilui is Moshe. Minamayim Mishisiu, he came from water. We talked before about water. But even though it's Alma Diskasi, it's still coming from water. But then there's the Etzem of Moshe, L'mayla Va'ata Tetzaveh. You just say Ata. So therefore, Moshe's day, Zayin Adar, birthday, and Zistalkus, is not celebrated in a revealed way. Obviously, we recognize and we honor it, and there are different customs. That's, in a nutshell, part of what the Rebbe says in that Sikha. That doesn't mean we don't recognize it. It just means there are different ways you celebrate something. But then, of course, comes the main question. How do we apply Zayin Adar to our lives? And the answer is right there in Tanya, Perek Mem Beis, he says. So he asked the famous question, the Gemara says, that when the Eibishter said to Moshe, he said, what am I ready? Moshe says to the Eden rather, now, what is Hashem already asking of you? All he's asking you is to revere him, is to have Yiras Hashem. So the Gemara asks, is Yiras such an easy thing, a simple thing, that Moshe just says, what is he already asking of you? So answers the Gemara, he can't, in Kabba Moshe, it's a milsa zitrasa. For Moshe, it's a small, not a big thing to have Yiras Hashem. Ask the Alter Rebbe, but that's Moshe, we're talking to the Yid. But we learn from this, that every Yid has Moshe Rabbeinu within him, as he explains beautifully. So when it comes Zayin Adar, it's not just Moshe, it's the Moshe within each one of us. The Moshe within each one of us gives us keach to go out of our mitzarim v'gvulim, our limitations, to part the sea, the difference between Alma Diskasi and Alma Disgali, the hidden and the revealed worlds, to receive the Torah, Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai, the mandate that God gives each one of us. So obviously, Moshe, nobody can compare to Moshe himself. It's even halacha. But bedakus, me'ein, we all have a Moshe within us. Just like there's this pastusha de Moshe b'chol dara, and every generation is the Moshe of the generation, there's, in a microcosm, a Moshe within each one of us. So when it comes Zayin Adar, a day when we honor Moshe's birth, Goel Yisrael, Goel Rishon, and his Talkus Hilula, which is the day when all of his Aved is elevated, and his Poel Yeshua is Bekerev Aras, as the Alter Rebbe explains. So all that affects each one of us. We're all students of Moshe Rabbeinu. We call him Moshe and the Rebbe. So obviously the commitment to call Teres Moshe, Zichru Teres Moshe Avdi, and the Talmud Godel Shemevil De Maisa Mitzvos, Gdomas Avedas Atfila, and all done in the fullest possible way. That's the best way to honor Zayin Adar. Plus all the different minhagim that we learn about and are brought in Sfarim. And interesting too, it's tak in the month of Adar, Napachu. So on one hand, yes, it was a sad day when Moshe passed, but ultimately became a great day. And it's the day that actually was the day that transformed. In Haman's mind, he thought it was a negative day. Ends up being the best day possible. Okay, now let's move one more Adar. Next Shabbos is Yud Aleph Adar, like the yahrzeit of the Rogatchover Gaon, Rabbi Yosef Rosen, who actually was born to a Chabad family. The Rav in Dvinsk for many years. They say he got a bracha from the Tzemach Tzedek. He once, so-called, bemoaned the fact, what should I do? The bracha I got was a nigla, not a chassidus, not a primus ater. The Rebbe points out that he does bring one place on the Rambam, he brings a Kabbalistic Chassidic concept. So the Rogatchover was born in 1858, that would be Tov Reish Yud Ches, and his Talkus was Tov Reish Tzadik Vov, 1936, I should say, in Vienna. But then he was buried in Dvinsk. Rogatchover, the Rebbe was Rogatchover was one of the Rebbe's, we can say, teachers. Rebbe received smicha from him. But also the Rebbe's Derech HaLimud, very much Rogatchover based. Obviously, others is influenced by his father, influenced by the Tzemach Tzedek, influenced by the Alter Rebbe, and other Gedei Yisrael, Ge'enim. But the Rogatchover, you see a unique element. I remember the Rebbe in Afabrenga once, Yud Aleph Nissen, I believe it was maybe Tafshin Lamed Zayin or Lamed Vov, and he said one of the Giluim of our generation is that a person like a Rogatchover rose. He said he wasn't particularly necessarily on the level of a Neshama D'Atzilis. The Rebbe didn't use that expression. It wasn't like the Neshama of a Tzaddik, like Alter Rebbe, a Rebbe. He wasn't a Rebbe. He was basically a commoner, so to speak. It's not the word that Rebbe uses, but basically he was, and still a zecher ge'enis. The Rebbe was saying it's a gili of the hikvus of the Mashiach, that you have such a gili alakus to a person that was relatively more of a person, I mean, he was obviously Yiras Shamayim and in all possible ways. But you don't associate with him with a particular level of exalted state as a Rebbe or a tzaddik. Not Chaz v'Shalom, opposite. That's not his identification. He was a Talmud Chacham, a Pesach, and yet you see such ge'enis. And one of the key things in his ge'enis that you see is his ability to strip halachas from their external manifestation and get to the core essence of any idea. And then once you have that, you can apply it to so many different situations. Just to give an example, let's take Zman. Time. The question is time made up of particles or is time one flow? So for example, you have the din, if a person, God forbid, desecrates Shabbos, so is it considered Shabbos one long hemshech? So once you desecrate Shabbos, there's no point in keeping it. Because Shabbos is one so one period of time called Kedusha Shabbos, Vayikadosh Yom HaShvi, and Yom HaShvi was desecrated. So that's that. Or do you say every moment is sanctified anew? So even if one moment, God forbid, a person was Machal Shabbos, you continue keeping Shabbos. So this is dependent on the question of what is time. Once you get to that question, you start applying the same idea can be applied to Sfiras Eimer. What does Sfiras Eimer to do with Shabbos? Nothing directly, but in the concept of time, you can apply the two. And then you can apply it to the laws of Nida. Wherever there's accounting, wherever there's time is a factor, this applies. This is the Rogatchover, is one of his unique elements. We found the Nekuda, and then it applies to so many different scenarios. And that's what he does so powerfully and brilliantly. When you read Tzofras Paneach, his name was Yosef, so Tzofras Paneach is a name for Yosef in the Torah, that you see, that's what he does. But he does it very briefly. So when you just read it, you just see ayin here, and he looks this Gemara, look at this Rambam, look here. When you start looking, you start seeing that he's making these parallels. So we have some of the, we owe a debt of gratitude, a big debt of gratitude to people like Reb Shlomo Kasher, of Hillman, and a few others. Rab was also Pinchas Teitz, and others that took these writings of the Rogatchover and they were mefaneach it. They spelled it out. So they take a quote and they spell out exactly what it says. And there's a classic a sefer written by Rab Kasher called Mefaneach Tzveinus. Mefaneach Tzveinus. Takes Sofras Faneach, Mefaneach Tzveinus. He's deciphering the hidden, where he really creates the klolim. And you see the Rogatchover, you say this based on Moreh Nevuchim and the Rambam. The idea of klal and prat, or like I said, Zman, is it made up of parts? Or is it one flow? And many other such central themes and how they play themselves out in so many different areas of halacha. Just to share a story, the Rogatchover was also very sharp. So when you came to him, people came to him for askamas. He was not easy to give askama. So he was very mavatal people. For example, someone came to him once with a sefer and he's looking at it, and he says, unbelievable. So the guy thought he's talking about his sefer. He says, no. He says, I didn't know there's a based fus in what town, I'm not sure what town he was talking about. I didn't know there was a printing house there. Or another one of his so-called critical statements was, he said, I've seen people take shmatas, meaning, because paper was made from shmatas, was made from waste wood, wasted shards, wasted different things that made paper of it. So I say, I've seen shmatas turned into paper. I've never seen someone take paper and turn it into shmatas. Talking about this guy's sefer. Not to talk negatively, it's not negative, but the Rogatchover was a very sharp, I'll say one one beautiful story. When they came to him after the Stalkos, the passing of the Rebbe Rashab, Tafresh Pei, Beis Nissen, So a little while afterwards, the Frierdiker Rebbe, who was the only child of the Rebbe Rashab, became deathly ill, the typhus. And it was really dangerous. It was a high fever. They wrote to the Rogatchover, asking a bracha, asking a tefillah. And he responded that everything's going to be all right. Because the Rebbe, meaning the new Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, is going now through becoming a mitzvos chadosha. Till now he was a son, he was a chassid. Now he's becoming a Rebbe. In halacha, to become a mitzvos chadosha, you have to go through hot fire to the point that it's white hot. And he said the fever that the Frierdiker Rebbe was undergoing was basically like transforming him from a chassid and a talmid and a son into a Rebbe. Among many, many other beautiful stories, powerful stories. So, as someone writes, the 11th of Adar is the yahrzeit of the Rogatchover. What lessons do we learn from the Rogatchover, who yahrzeit is on this date? I think he's one of the Rebbe's teachers and may have been one to sign the Rebbe's smicha ordination. In his honor, can we discuss a few stories about him and some of his teachings? So I did that. And ultimately, the learning is the Rogatchover Gaon that learned Torah day and night. They said that he had biggest yisurim on Shabbos because he couldn't write. Ad kadei kach. To that extent. So firstly, we learn about Iyun b'Torah and Esek b'Torah and a kachin Torah and a love. Because he literally dissected Torah in a way no one had done till then. There were those that established klolim based on principles, based on different halachas and so on. His colleague, Reb Chaim Brisk, did similar. They say the Chaim Brisk divided everything into gavra and chefza. The person and the object. So everything is the person who does the mitzvah and the object you do the mitzvah with. The Rogatchover was divided into three. Poel, Pu'ula, Nifl. Poel is the person. Nifl is the result. And the Poel is the act. So you see here again, a certain dakas are more refined and more subtle, I would say the right word. The more subtle breakdown. Okay. So the lesson in Limud Torah and the lesson of Achdus of Torah, finding the unity within everything. And the Rebbe, of course, used it, especially bring it together with Primus Torah, where you see the Rogatchover uses the Rogatchover to establish these principles and understanding like klolim of Torah, yahrzeit of Torah, and then bring it all together as a Torah achas of Hashem Echad. Okay. Let's talk about Parsha Tetzaveh. What lessons do we learn from living with the times with this week's Torah Parsha? So we already discussed one main one, which is Va'ata Tetzaveh. It doesn't say Moshe. The Ata. Ata, as Chassidishe explains, on Ata Reisel Adas, Ata refers to the Etzem. Marabetz Boye Ve'emer Zeh is like Ata. Du Atzmus Ein Sof Alein, as Bavizn the Alter Rebbe teaches, Ata Reisel Adas. So Tzadikim Deim Lebeirem, so we're talking about the Ata of Moshe Rabbeinu. We of course have the Maimer of the Rebbe from Tovshim and Alef. Va'ata Tetzaveh that the Rebbe gave out, the last Maimer the Rebbe gave out, and talks much about the Ata, the Etzem of Moshe, of the Zayin Adar. And it's the Ata that's connected to Kosis Lamoyer. What comes afterwards, he's telling him the mitzvah of creating olive oil. Shemen Zayis Zoch, Kosis Lamoyer. Pure olive oil, Kosis Lamoyer. That you press, you squeeze. And the Rebbe speaks there about the challenges of life, challenges of Golus, that bring out the deepest energy. So the etzem of Ata comes through Kosis. And this, for many Chassidim, would become a statement that we experienced with Zayin Adar and then Gimel Tammuz. And it's interesting, this is a separate parsha. After Truma, where we learn about the Mishkan itself, and we learn about the main Kalim, the Odin, and the Menorah, and the Shulchan, and so on. Here, Parsha Tetzaveh, the Menorah, not just the Menorah, the building of the Menorah, the Hashem and Lamoyer, and also ketoros. And the Rebbe explains, because in the Tetzaveh you get now the deeper level of Yechida, ketoros. The end of the Parsha, you have Achaz Bashani, Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol brought ketoros. So after Truma establishes the main foundations of the Mishkan, Parsha Tetzaveh, which is the Giluyim, so to speak, of Makifim and Pnimim, the Yeriyas, and the Kalim, the walls, the tapestries, and the vessels in the Beis Hamikdash. Now we're going deeper into the level that's not just the etzem, higher than Gili, higher than Pnimi and Makif. The Pnimim and the Makifim, the Ata of the Tzaddik, and the Ata of Moshe Rabbeinu, who of course was the vision of the Mishkan that he passed on to Betzalel, which would be the Keli for the Ata of Atzmus, Shachanti B'Seicham, Tafke here Lamata, Afke Abayis Hazeh, Shemayim Shomei Shemayim Leichal Kalucha. Heaven and heaven of heavens cannot contain Etzem, but Dafke Lamata, yes. So the lesson is about revealing the Gili Etzem within us, but it should be revealed within our faculties, within our Keiches Gluim, manifest within our containers and integrated. And that also connects to month of Adar, because Adar is that, Simcha Peretz Geder. On one hand, the Simcha reaches the deepest part of the Nefesh, Etzem HaNefesh, but it's expressed. It opens up channels, Peretz Geder, it breaks through boundaries, and reveals the Simcha also in a revealed way in this world, to the point that it even transforms the darkness. Okay, there are a few other questions that came in that are some follow-up, some... So let's just do, since we have some time, we'll cover them. I like this opportunity where sometimes you don't feel pressured, and I can cover some back questions that were asked over time. So the first was, we talked about sports in episodes 452, 504, 528, 532. I believe also a few weeks ago, I don't remember which week, probably 5-6 weeks ago, we also spoke about sports. Yeah, for sure. The week of the Super Bowl. That would have been 2 weeks ago. So that would have been also episode 580. 580. In addition to the ones I mentioned. So there are a few other questions that came in about that. And being also people are writing about the Olympics and others, there's always sports out there. So I've talked about it pretty comprehensively. And I'm giving you resources which you can easily look up. So I'm not going to go over everything I said there. As well as if you use our AI agent, by going to simonjacobson.ai, you could ask any question like, what's the perspective of the Rebbe or Chassidishe on sports? And you'll get should get a thorough answer. So that's a great tool to use, and I encourage you to use it. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, we're talking now, what should be our attitude to sports be? So that's the general category, but there's a few specific questions. How should we react to someone watching a game while sitting in a Torah class? Dear Rabbi Jacobson, the other night you spoke about a woman that complained about her husband's obsession with football games. Tonight in Shul we saw another example of someone's football obsession. It's already after the football season, but it's relevant to baseball, to basketball, to hockey, to whatever you want. Soccer. So the person's writing like this. We have a weekly Tanya class on Thursday nights for an hour, and one man was sitting in the class with his phone on his lap with a football game playing, thankfully with the volume off. And every few minutes he would look down at his phone. We felt he was being disrespectful. So someone said something to him and asked, if you want to watch the football game so bad, why didn't you stay home to do it? Why do you have to sully our Chassidishe class with your football game? He replied that even though he was looking at his phone every few minutes, if he deducts the 15 minutes he looked at his phone, he was still getting 45 minutes of Chassidus, and that's better than nothing. So who is right, we or him? I love being in a position to have to make a decision. Look, these are all about human relations. There are things that the Torah says, a mitzvah says you must do. There are things the Torah says you're absolutely not allowed to do. But then there's a lot of things called reshus. It's a whole category. We need a judgment call, case by case. In spirit, obviously, learning Torah, what are you looking at sports for? You should be looking at the phone for anything, frankly. Not just sports. Talking about emergency, I'm not talking about emergencies now. You're learning Torah, nothing. Like the Rebbe would often say, you shouldn't even hear the phone ring. Now, let's say this person is in a situation, whatever, he's addicted to it. And it's hard for him to concentrate on learning. Should he not come to the class? That's the way the question I would pose. So I would say, most likely, I would say let him come, and you overlook certain things. I'm not saying it's good. The question also is, how do you get through to him? Do you humiliate him? Do you embarrass him? Do you do it publicly? Do you do it privately? I would lean toward privately. One-on-one, someone speaks to him. That way he's not in any way has to save face or pride or other things. And especially we know that people have cheshbenis with each other. Many times people I've seen, they criticize for a correct critique, but they have their own agenda why they're criticizing. They want to get even with this guy. Well, like Chassidishe says, that some Chassidishe brings, sometimes your own little judgmental side or your little mischievous side, so you dress it up in holiness. So you have to also know the intentions and do it the right way. I will share with you a letter that I saw, not about this, but a lesson you learn from it. So a doctor used to come to my classes. One day, because he was so appreciative, he brings me a letter from the Rebbe. I'm surprised. It's actually signed by the Rebbe, Ksav Koche, the Rebbe's original signature. Letter in English. No one has this letter. I said to him, don't give me the original. He says, no, I want you to have this. I said, give me a copy. I'm happy for it. He insisted, so I have it. In the letter he writes that he's starting to become frum, and he's starting to go to shul, but he has a problem. In his shul, there's someone that sits right in front of him that's always talking in shul. And he doesn't know what to do. Should he yell at the guy? Should he ignore him? Should he move elsewhere? Should he go to another shul? He's writing to the Rebbe. Now, I happen to know this doctor. I know his personality. And the Rebbe got it right immediately. The Rebbe wrote to him, the next time you see him speaking in shul, you should think to yourself, look how beautiful a Jew is. That even a Jew who speaks in shul still wants to come to shul to daven. Now, I'm not saying this is across the board, gives everyone a license to speak in shul. But it shows you sometimes you have to look with the right eye, because you never know who the person is. And that's why it's very hard to answer black and white. So obviously, you ask me objectively, we all understand the spirit. You're learning Torah, you're learning Chassidishe. What are you watching sports? But this already touches not about sports per se. This is in general people and the different distractions they have. Another person asked like this, hi, Rabbi Jacobson. Okay, so that question was, how should we react to someone watching a game while sitting in a Torah class? Is there room for sports in a Chassidishe life? Another person writes. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. Thank you so much for your weekly broadcasts. They are both informative and entertaining. My question to you is as follows. I'm a 47-year-old Lubavitcher. All my life I've played sports, exercise, and have enjoyed all of it. Sports and exercise have enhanced my life immensely. Anecdote. When we were in Mesivta Olatera, Rabbi Zusha Wilhelm of blessed memory, at our request, facilitated the Olatera gym and pool being open to us, was very open-minded about our sports and play. We thanked him during his lifetime, but I have to continue to thank him tremendously for that. I hope some of his family is listening to that, and I especially said his name in his honor. Philosophically, where does play and sports fit into Torah and Chassidus world and life? So here again, I go back to the shus. The truth is, if you start asking the highest standard, every second that you're not learning Torah is bittul Torah. And yet we know people have a thing called v'nishmatem leid nafshei sechem, health, exercise. And we know stories where the Rebbe encouraged, especially children, summer camp, or throughout the year to have time to play ball or other ways. Now, if you're talking about a Talmud Chacham who's all days learning Torah day and night, so that's his shlichus. But for an average young person, to give some time that they have a little for sports or whatever you want to call it, and especially if it's l'shem shamayim, like the Rebbe writes about the letters, the summer camp letters, that's about strengthening the body in order that the neshama, resting the body rather, and giving it, and so-called giving it a little more leisure in order for the neshama to become stronger. So then it's mamish kol masech l'shem shamayim. And especially if it included health, but it also creates demeanor, teamwork that people learn in sports. And in general, having an outlet, a physical outlet, healthy competition. There are a lot of things you can learn from it. The Rebbe gave a whole Sicha Shmini Tov Shin Mem, a lesson from soccer for children. Tzivus Hashem, 2 teams and so on. I spoke about it 2 weeks ago. But again, you have to know where you stand. If you're a person who's learning all the time, then every second is tired. But everybody needs time to take a walk. Is that considered like sports? So playing a sport is not to the end of the world in that context. But again, it's case by case, and I don't want to create any broad, sweeping lessons and directives. You should talk to your mashpia and describe your situation and hopefully get good advice and counsel. What we were talking about was not just playing sports, we're talking about watching sports. And we're talking about being consumed by it. And that's already another thing we see here in young kids in schools. Sports is their biggest passion. But that's another discussion which is not for right now. We've talked about it, I'll talk about it some more as well. Everything in moderation is the basic rule. And finally, the question about Olympics. And then I could just refer you to previous programs. How about the Olympics? Now that the Olympics are over, the Winter Olympics in Milano, Italy. So we spoke about this in episode 392. So the Olympics have yet another aspect. It's not just spectator sports, that it has roots, as the Rebbe writes and the Rebbe spoke about. And I discussed in episode 392, Sichos from Tafshin Lamed Daled, the Olympics then, and the Rebbe was very dismissive. Especially its roots are connected to Avodah Zarah. Not to say it's Avodah Zarah today, but the old ancient Greeks. And the Rebbe speaks about the flame, the torch that they passed on. So the Rebbe was very negative, especially when they talked about doing mitzvos and other things by Olympics. The Rebbe negated it because of its roots. And there's letters, and the Rebbe refers to articles that were written, and the Rebbe also negated. So that's a special thing called Olympics. Now, the actual competitions, again, I'm not saying an isud here, this should be a shayla tarov. The Rebbe didn't make an isud, he didn't say it's prohibited. He was just made it even more, let's put it a little more dubious even than regular sports. And look into episode 392 for that. Okay. We have a few more minutes, so let me just cover a few questions that came in that I think I can cover in this period of time. Someone asked about purchasing a building advice. So let me do that. I hope it's still relevant. How would the Rebbe advise a community disagreement whether to build a smaller or larger building? So here's the question. Our community is looking to purchase a building. We are debating between a small building for $800,000 and a much larger building, 3 times the size, for $1.5 million. Those pushing for the smaller building say it's more affordable, and the cost of the larger building will put the community in debt for many years. Those voting for the larger building are saying, regardless of the price, it's important to have growing room. Can we ask Rabbi Jacobson if he remembers the Rebbe giving organizations advice in similar situations and advising to go for the larger building and growing into it? Thank you. So, yes, there are answers from the Rebbe, but always case by case. The Rebbe generally said, ask askonim al asar, meaning people who are activists or business people on location. Because it's not just a question of money, it's also a question of need. Is it really going crazy to get the 1.5, the larger building? And it's not going to be filled? Is it just for pride? Or you'll actually grow into it, and maybe it'll pressure you to grow into it, which was, of course, the Rebbe always wanted. And in that sense, the argument would be more harchove, instead of later having to scramble and try to find something bigger. So you have to very important to know what is the viability of the growth. And if there is viability, the leaning would most likely be to build a bigger one. But again, with advice on people on location, because there's always nuances and gray areas and details that we may not even be aware of. Maybe there's other factors involved. If you get the bigger one, zoning issues, not just price. What will the community say? So there's a lot of factors to discuss, It's not purely money. So I would not make it a money issue. More money, therefore we shouldn't do it. No. If it should be done, you raise the money and you struggle harder and you raise more money. That's how you work. Because you can make the same cheshbon. You know what? We don't have to buy anything. That we don't spend any money. But then you have to rent. That would be the approach, taking all the factors, but above all, talking to mumchim, friends that are experts on location. Whether it's real estate experts, whether it's brokers, whether it's lawyers, whether it's business people. And just get the whole picture objectively, and then come back with a report to the team or whoever is the finders, the steering committee or the finders committee, whatever they're called. Okay, we'll do one more question like that. Where should I visit in Israel? Somebody writes. I have a question for the rabbi about Israel. What's the source for people? No, I'm sorry. Hi, Rabbi. I'm planning a trip to Israel in February. It'll be my first time there, and I will only have a week. Well, we're already at the end of February, so it may not be relevant, but maybe for others. Can you please suggest 2 or 3 of the most important places and holy sites I should visit? On day 1 in Israel, I plan to visit the Kotel Western Wall, but please make some suggestions for others important places I should also visit. Thank you. So remember, as the Rebbe always emphasizes, you go to Eretz Yisrael not for tourism, for sightseeing, for the food, and for external stuff. It's Eretz HaKadosh. So make sure you learn Torah there. You do extra mitzvos, extra davening, extra tzedakah. As far as locations, best safe bet is to go where the Frierdiker Rebbe went when he went to Israel. So there's, of course, the case you're going to already, Yerushalayim. Other places, Yerushalayim. I don't know where you'll be Shabbos. Go to the Tzemach Tzedek Shul. There's Chevron, Moras HaMachpelah, place to pray. There's Tzfas, the holy city of Tzfas, where the Arizal was, and there are many tzaddikim who are buried there. The old cemetery, including the Arizal. Tveria, where the Rambam, the Shalah. Miron, where the Rashbi is. So basically the Mekemes Gdeshim, the holy places, where you have tzaddikim who are there. Kever Rochel, of course, is on the way to Chevron. That would be the places I would focus on. Make it a holy trip, as it deserves a holy land. I'm not saying you can't do other things, but you're asking me, those are the priorities. And above all, do good things there. And of course, be mashpia on the people that are around you. Influence them, inspire, explain why you've come. Turn it into a not just a taking, experiencing, but giving. In other words, you're not just taking in and touring or sightseeing, but you're turning it into a movement, into a action based, whether it's mitzvot tefillin or the other mitzvahim or any other things that you can be involved in that way. Okay, with that we will conclude. I think it's a good note to end. This has been My Life Chassidus Applied. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. A continuing Freilich and Chedesh Adar. Should only hear good news. And Mismach l'Geula, from this Geula, we should go right into the Geula Amitis V'Ashlema. And we will be here next Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. It will be a Purim, special Purim edition. And everyone be well and be blessed. And may your Futzamayna Secha Chutza finally bring the Oseh Marda Malka Mashiach Kipshute K'mashmoy down here in the fullest and most revealed sense.
This program is brought to you by My Life, Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.